In 2006, I decided to rent a game for the next few days but had no idea what was available that I hadn't already played, as my primary gaming console was still the PlayStation 2. Walking through the aisle, one game cover caught my eye that I hadn't seen before: Yakuza. I didn't bother reading the back cover and just gave it a shot. To my surprise, Yakuza felt like a 3D side-scroller beat-em-up, featuring a fantastic story and a pretty enjoyable dub. I poured a great amount of hours into Yakuza before seeing the epic ending. 2 years later saw the Western release of its sequel and forced me to pull out my semi-retired PlayStation 2 to play through another fantastic entry in this underrated franchise. While the argument can be made there were quality dips during the PlayStation 3 era offerings, consisting of 3 mainline games and a spin-off, my hopes were incredibly high for the next Yakuza games that included an overall prequel, remakes of the PS2 entries, and a conclusive iteration to the saga. The developers switched gears to give players something different, by focusing not on being inside organized crime, but bringing forth justice, even in the court of law. Though not a true Yakuza experience, I expected it to fulfill all the criteria that made its spiritual predecessor so fantastic, even if not exhaustive. By playing so many Yakuza games in the past, it was pretty simple to figure out what Judgment entailed from a completion perspective, including an extensive story, various side quests called sub-stories, and playing minigames aplenty. Like the other games in the series, there's a checklist of activities to complete, including clearing the menu at every restaurant, playing all the Sega arcade games like personal favorite Virtua Fighter 5, and even making friends in some odd ways. From a trophy perspective, Judgment is not only time-consuming because of how lengthy the story is, but also features certain timed requirements that are locked out if the player isn't aware, like finding and photographing all the cats in Komorocho, with some only being available during certain story moments. With a more grind-heavy trophy list compared to other games in the franchise, I stuck to my old goals of finishing the story, taking on all the sub-stories, and defeating the best of the best enemies. These goals took over 70 hours to complete, with yours truly planning another playthrough in the English dub. Though the game is based in the all-too-familiar Kamurocho in Japan, Judgment takes a very different narrative approach by putting the player in the gummed shoes of Takayuki Yagami, a former attorney-turned-private detective looking to investigate a series of recent Yakuza murders. As expected from any game in this franchise, Judgment features lengthy cutscenes, incredible twists and turns, and a thrilling cast that doesn't have any greatly defining links to its spiritual predecessors. Unlike the Yakuza games, a great amount of answers to grand questions aren't solved during or after battles, but Yagami simply having conversations, with the player being able to pose questions or offering Takayuki's opinion during certain conversations. To make this game user-friendlier is the ability to play it fully dubbed in English, with a voice acting cast that mostly does the dialogue justice. The gameplay is very similar to what was seen in Yakuza 6, as it too utilizes the Dragon engine, originally crafted for the Song of Life. Like Kiryu before him, Takayuki can mix light and strong strikes with the touching of the square and triangle buttons in a timed sequence, grab and potentially toss opponents courtesy of the circle button, or evade with the X or cross button. Yagami can block attacks and even counter with well-timed button presses, like springing off the ground for a quick attack when knocked down. With each successful attack dished out by Yagami, the EX meter located left of the protagonist's health bar will rise so the player can hit the R2 trigger to power up and unleash brutal special attacks. With a full EX meter, the player can simply tap the triangle button during certain moments in battle to perform an EX action that can range from a simple kick to the face of a downed opponent to pulling off impressive dodges and strikes when Yagami is intoxicated. Fighting styles from Yakuza 0 and Kiwami return here, as the player can tap down on the D-pad and switch between the more punch-heavy Tiger style to the kicking-oriented Crane style, with the latter being better for crowded scenarios, where creating distance is important, One of the biggest differences from a fighting perspective that makes Judgment stand out is Taka's ability to leap over enemies for sudden throws and strikes, wall run into attacks like the flying head scissors, and even pull off special EX actions specifically made for leaping and wall running. Weapons, unfortunately, are limited to some of the ones dropped by enemies like baseball bats, or items located on the street, such as traffic cones. There are also temporary health limitations added to most boss battles, called mortal wounds. Mortal wounds can cut off a portion of Yakumi's health upon taking a big attack, only being cured by medical kits or a lone doctor living in the sewers. Replacing roaming enemies like Mr. Shakedown from Yakuza 0 are gang raids, where a particular gang floods the area, with defeating high-powered captains being the only way to end the raid quickly. Thanks to the game's skill tree, Yakumi can learn more EX actions, increase his health and attack power, and even make it easier for the player to complete the action sequences not involving hand-to-hand combat. Beyond the aforementioned moments of dialogue choices, there are remixed and even new gameplay implementations. Chase sequences from the previous Yakuza games have more importance to the overall gameplay, as do tailing or trailing scenarios, with both having slight modifications, including more button prompts and hiding spots respectively. Littered throughout the story and sub-stories are investigation scenes, usually relying on the player focusing on the right spot, and Yagami giving his thoughts on the matter. Photo missions are similar to the investigation sequences, where Takayuki has to attain the best photo in a limited amount of time. There are also lockpicking moments, with one being more based around cylinders, and the other having the player to rotate the analog sticks, the latter being arguably the worst new mechanic in the game. And then there are the drones. Drones not only can be used for investigation purposes, but can also shoot down enemies and be raced. Friendships are also a big part of getting the full Judgment experience, with the befriending of NPCs opening up side quests and even a few EX actions, as well as certain friends fighting alongside Yakumi in battle. Yakumi can even romance a selected few women. Unfortunately, every minigame usually connected to the franchise still haven't returned alongside the Dragon Engine, including karaoke and pool. And some minigames such as managing a cabaret club aren't in this iteration, though it makes sense considering whom the player is controlling. The base mechanics pulled from other Yakuza games, including the battle system, the narrative presentation, great amount of sub-stories and minigames, are still strong in Judgment, with some newer implementations perfect for this game, but not necessarily well executed. Judgment provides a great experience that sets itself apart from everything else in the franchise for mostly all the right reasons. Like its Yakuza brethren, Judgment proves to be a genre-bending experience, part beat-em-up, part RPG, part party game, part simulator, that produces a magnificent story boosted by the consistent quality of action provided by a battle system rooted in a game over a decade old. Players who don't necessarily care about the action and just want to see how the story plays out will get so much satisfaction from Judgment, while Yakuza players who enjoy the fights more than anything else may be slightly underwhelmed, though most likely happy about the purchase Judgment surely warrants. Newcomers will find a memorable noir piece that doesn't take itself too seriously outside of the main story, including trying to stop a twisted pervert from grabbing butts.